the Eye Test with Eric and Brady. We've got another fabulous guest today. We're going to talk about sports from a little bit different perspective with me as a photographer, Brady as a writer. Thanks for being here and enjoy the show. All right, well, welcome back to the Eye Test. I'm Eric. This is Brady. We've got Rob Zatechka with us here today. We're going to talk some Husker stuff, and like we usually do, try and get a little. We've been getting a little philosophical lately.
Tangents.
Lots of tangents, but we've been getting a little philosophical. Last episode, we even worked in some Friedrich Nietzsche into it.
It wasn't planned, but
no, it wasn't planned. It just happened. But anyways, to start on that, let's start where we kind of left off on that last one. Last time Brady and I were together, we talked about how I had noticed in the practices I'd gone down to, and Brady's been down to all of them so far. The first thing that struck me from the spring practices was it was very, very much a blue-collar workman-like atmosphere down there and attitude, where like in recent years, in several years, it's felt very much to me like more of a rah-rah, fake it till you make it kind of energy, where they were pushing the hype a little bit artificially. And when I'm down in Lincoln now, there's none of that. There's much less of the pumped up music and what I think is some of that fake stuff. But
are they playing music during the practices?
No,
they play it during stretching, but that's it.
Okay.
But it's not, but even in previous years, which you weren't here for, they had that music like really loud.
Yeah.
And you could tell it was a central focus of what they were doing. And it all, like I said, I'm usually very sensitive to that thing when I see or hear things, who are you trying to convince, me or yourself? And it always felt a little bit like they were trying to convince themselves they were awesome. We're in Lincoln right now. When I'm down there, I'm very much feeling just, we don't care about any of that shit. Let's just do the work. Just do the work. And I'm not hearing any false praise. It's a lot of work and I've noticed a lot more detail in the work. So what I wanted to ask you about was a little bit about that in your perspective on that blue collar attitude of just doing the work, just do the work and it'll pay off in the long run.
Well, and I think that, I think that holds for anything in life.
I do.
So it's, and I'm one of those people where I've got a pretty strong belief in positive attitude. And I mean, I'm a little bit of a rah-rah guy for the most part in that sense. But I also love the concept of the grinder, the people who go out and it's just, I'm going to work, I'm going to work, I'm going to work, I'm going to work. And at some point, good things are going to happen. Now, you got to work smart. I mean, there's working hard and smart.
Right.
You've got to be intelligent. You got to have some direction with what you're doing with it. But it seemed like, and I agree with what you're saying, when you watch that team perform, there wasn't that substance that you were looking for. And I think you saw that on the field. There's kind of two things that I thought that were very much lacking in terms of what the product that you saw on the field the last several years. One was attention to detail. And I think when you get into that, I mean, attention to detail and hard work are two things that almost always go hand in hand. And when you don't have those two things, the byproduct on the field, it's the 1,000,001 little mistakes that'll doom you no matter how many good things you do. And you constantly saw the penalties, the turnovers, those special teams miscues are always a big one. You can tell what coaching staff believes in that blue collar attitude and believes in the attention to detail, because those are coaching staffs who always take special teams and put them. I'm not saying special teams has to rule practice, but it's got to be up there with the offense and the defense as well. But when you saw those little things breaking down, the turnovers, the penalties, and the special teams miscues. Those are things where you would always sit back and go like, okay, how are we losing to teams like Georgia Southern? How are you losing to a pretty darn mediocre Northwestern team? Or go last year, which, and I say last year, I'm referencing the 21 season, which on paper, statistically, was a great team. I mean, it was some of the best offensive productivity we'd seen in years, which is actually kind of saying something, because with some of the newer offensive styles we've seen, Callahan onward, there's been some pretty amazing offensive productivity. And this was one of the best offensive seasons we've ever seen. It's one of the better defensive seasons that they've had in a while. And when you look at that, how well they're playing offensively, how well they're playing defensively, and they're losing to kind of some of these crappy teams like Illinois. And then they're by I'm just throwing it out there. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but you're losing to a crappy team by 3 points. You're losing to very good teams like Michigan and Ohio State by a single score.
Right.
It's the question people would always ask is like, how do you look like that? How do you lose to a bad team by 3 points, and you lose to these amazing teams by 3 points? That doesn't add up.
Baffles the mind a little bit.
Yeah, and the thing I would always tell people, it's like, that's the curse of those 1,000,001 little mistakes. That's the curse of not having discipline. It's that's what turnovers and penalties and those special teams miscues will do to you as a team. You will lose to crappy teams by an incredibly narrow margin. You will lose to very good teams by this incredibly narrow margin if you don't have that work ethic and that attention to detail.
Yeah, I've always talked to my kids in athletics and life, because I always tie the two together, about that game of inches. You know, when we had Mitch on here earlier this year, we were talking about when the Indomitian Sioux, he missed tipping that ball on that field goal. I have the picture. He missed
it's scary how
he
close
missed it by like, and just like, and we were postulating that like another inch or two could have like changed the trajectory of Nebraska football.
Yeah,
right. College
you
football
win that game, and what possibly happens after that, you could have possibly changed the trajectory of the program. But it's always those game of inches. I was listening to talk about detail, and in the last couple practices I was at, I kind of gravitated down towards the linemen, because I think that's where the
real athletes are.
Yeah. Let's be honest.
Oh, don't get me started on this whole concept of skill positions first, right? Now that I'm a father of a guy in the trenches, right? Now all of a sudden I'm bristling at this concept of the skill position guys. I'm like, whoa, let's have a conversation about that. But anyways, I was watching them, and they were doing something that I hadn't seen before. Now, granted, maybe I hadn't noticed it, but they were working on hand placement, like literally the difference between here and here.
Yeah.
Grabbing, the difference between grabbing him under the pads versus up in the armpit. And I don't ever remember seeing, like, going back, stopping and saying, no, it's got to be here, and working on, and then doing that again and again and again. Just that game of inches when you're talking about your first step, as it pertains to the lineman, right? Not here, but here.
Well,
right. And it's only like a couple inches difference, but that they were really harping on those couple inches.
And that does make a huge difference. I mean, I think about with the hand position, the shoulder pads, that concept, and it depends on the coach. It depends on some of the blocking styles they're teaching. I know some coaches are like, hey, I want your hands down here. Some are up here. Some are get them in the armpits. Some are keep everything vertical. Some are, get the palms up and lift up. There's some different coaching styles, and I'm not going to come out and say like, well, putting them here or here or here is the correct method. I mean, there are more than one way to skin a cat. But here's the thing, though. You've got to teach something and you've got to maintain a consistency with it, because if you don't, the end product on the field is going to lack that consistency then. And so if you're teaching guys, hey, here's where we want your hands, here's exactly where we want your hands, and then you go out and practice that day in, day out. Well, guess what? When the players go out there on the field, their hand position is going to be consistent throughout the course of a game. And that's what's going to give you that success. I mean, and you talk about the foot position, 100% as well. And whatever they're teaching, you've got to have that meticulousness in terms of that technique. The story I always tell about that is the Colorado game in 1992. So that was the Halloween night game. Colorado came in. They had both Coy Detmer and
consequently
Cordell
Stewart.
One of the, probably quick side tangent, probably one of that game is probably in the top 3 of loudest I've ever heard that stadium.
It was
insane.
It was a crazy, insane night. And sometimes a team comes out there in the zone and the other one's just not. From a pure talent standpoint, Colorado of that era was very much, I kind of equate them to how Ohio State is now. It was just this constant run of NFL guys at all positions, offense, defense, their punters. I mean, everybody. I mean, they just ran NFL guys through that program in that era like you would not believe. I have told many people repeatedly, hands down, every year we played Colorado, they were by far and away the more talented team. Easy. We always beat them, but one of that game, so I was a redshirt sophomore that year, and I was the swing offensive tackle. So I would bounce back and forth between right and left tackle the whole game. And so during the course of the game, I'm playing both spots, and I had this great game. I mean, it was just this absolutely amazing game. I remember coming up to the line of scrimmage, recognizing this really odd, kind of overshift defense that they threw at us with the hope of stopping an option play that. And we came out in a formation to run option, and you could tell they were like, okay, we're going to throw this wildcat defense at them and see if that doesn't work against the option. And I still remember recognizing it, making a call to the guard to come over and block my guy. I had to bounce out and block an additional guy, had to do this kind of reach block against him to free the option play up, because you always wanted this end guy who they had yet another guy outside that we needed to have free to be the option guy. And I remember it was a little bit of a higher level recognition for a stupid sophomore to make. And I remember coming up, recognizing it, making the call, sprung the option, had a really nice play on the game. Calvin Jones had the long touchdown run on the counter sweep. I was the lead. That was the lead pulling tackle on that play. Knocked down Deion Figures, their All-American corner, on the play. I mean, it was one of those games where everything went right for everybody. Monday rolls around after the game. We're still flying higher than a kite. And so Milt Tenniper and Dan Young, the O-line coaches, would always grade you. And they had a grading system where it was 0, 1, and 2. 2 is the highest grade. If 0 was you completely botched the block, technique was wrong. 1 was you made the block, but the technique was wrong, or the technique was right, but maybe your guy beat you. But you were kind of halfway there. The technique was right. Everything else you did right. It's just sometimes the other guy gets a paycheck too, and he beats you. 2 was technique was correct. You effectively blocked the guy across from you. So in an average good grade, you'd walk in anything like 185, 1.9 or higher for your average grade. 2.0 would be grading out perfect. I come in, I got like a 135 or something. I mean, 1.5 and less, you would always walk in and just be like, oh man, what did I screw up? Like 175 was like an average. Like I did okay. It wasn't great, but I did okay. Came in, you saw that 1.9 or better. You're like, oh, hell yeah. I'm coming in thinking this was a 2.0 day for old Rob here. I come in, I got like this 135, and I'm like, huh, the heck? And Tenneper and I were the only ones in the office, in his office at the time. And he kind of glances up, and I hadn't said anything. I just kind of had this like, what the hell look on my face. Like, man, how did I grade so poorly? And Tenneper, I mean, I didn't say anything, and he just does this. Well, Rob, he saw the look on my face. He's like, well, Rob, he goes, you're the swing guy. He goes, you beat your guy every time. Because you blocked the hell out of whoever you were supposed to block every play you were in. He goes, just, you're the swing guy. And he goes, there was several plays at left tackle. You were stepping with right tackle footwork on the play. He goes, or when you were at right tackle, there were several plays you were stepping with left tackle footwork on the play. But I was like, but I still pancaked the guy, coach. I put this dude on his back. He's like, I know, but the step work was wrong. And then the light went on in my head. I was just like, oh, I get it now. All right, yeah, fair enough. All right, coach, I got you. I see where you're coming from. But it's that mentality you've got to have. What you're talking about, that hand position where they're insistent. No, it's got to be here, and it's got to be right here every time. And if you practice that and you're meticulous about that and you're consistent about that, that's where you see it pay off on the field with the elimination of those mistakes and the turnovers and the penalties and things like that.
What comes to mind is discipline and detail.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? Like it may, like you were saying, there's several different techniques to teach, but this is ours.
Yeah.
And we're going to do it this way. And that just the attention to detail and the discipline and get accountability to stick to those things we're teaching, just from a mentality standpoint, has got to pay off dividends. Just like I said, that this is our expectations and we're going to do it this way. And that translates over into everything, whether it's showing up on time and giving max effort in practice and doing your film stuff, right? The mentality of the whole thing is what fascinates me more than any individual, because, I coached my kids playing baseball for years, and, there's several different ways to teach hitting a ball, but this is the way that I did it. This is the way we're going to do it, but that's all part of that mentality of discipline and expectations. And I think Matt's, by all accounts so far, is pretty darn good at holding them accountable for how Nebraska football is going to be going forward.
I mean, yeah, he seems to be kind of out on the front foot about that. I mean, he's clearly been successful throughout college, had an unsuccessful NFL stint, but
I always throw that one out because I'm one of those. There's NFL guys, and there's college guys. And
I almost see it as like, and I think I told you this when we were talking about it, the whole failure at the NFL, man, that almost slides into the plus column for me.
It almost kind of does. I mean, there's a lot of, that track record of college guys, classic guys who've kind of cut their teeth in college. And I know Rule had a year with the Giants. I mean, he's got NFL chops. He's been there from a coaching standpoint, but some guys are college guys, some guys are NFL guys, and it either translates or it doesn't. At the same time, I mean, you see some of these guys. I mean, take like Lovie Smith coming to coach Illinois.
Yeah, they didn't go too well.
It just doesn't. I mean, some of the NFL guys seem like they can recruit, but it's almost one of those. You sit in front of a kid and hey, when I was coaching so-and-so with the Bears, that carries weight with a recruit. Doesn't necessarily translate onto the field, though.
I think that I have a feeling that that has a that kind of recruiting approach has a very short shelf life if it doesn't translate to a winning program.
Well,
right?
no, and it's got to translate onto the field as well, too. And at the NFL level, man, it's kind of an interesting coaching style that works there, because you've got to be able to motivate a little bit. But at the end of the day, it's that there's kind of this kind of really incredibly narrow middle ground of motivating but letting professionals go out and do what they do best. And
I got to think there's a lot less micromanaging of those kinds of things.
And I will say this, that there are NFL coaches who do micromanage. And man, they've got to be good at it. I mean, and they've really got to be able to click with the players and get and connect message wise with the players to get that to work, just because it's the micromanaging thing doesn't work well at the NFL level. Again, there's guys who do it and do it well. I mean, I think Bill Parcells was kind of a micromanager. I mean,
but you have a track record of it working.
I think Belichick is a bit of a micromanager.
A bit. I've heard that he's.
Yeah. I mean, Tom Coughlin could be a hell of a micromanager. I mean, the guy's got to. I mean, these are Super Bowl winning coaches we're talking about here. So I mean, there's guys who do it and it does work. But it's again, for the most part, I don't see the micromanagers working well at that level. It's letting pros go do what they do best. The other thing at the NFL level, and this is kind of true for all sports, I mean, you go to the NFL, the other thing I always found interesting was the emphasis on just pure fundamentals. I mean, if you watch NFL games, it's got some of the offenses have gotten more complex over the years, but for the most part, most NFL teams run a fairly simple offense. They run a fairly simple defense. It's just incredible fundamentals that they practice at that level. And the players that make it to the NFL are players who are amazing at fundamentals. So
no, and to me, I go back to like what Matt Rule's kind of said about developing his guys. He's a big developmental guy, wants to go back to Nebraska's roots of being a developmental program. I think he's on a show I was listening to the other day where he kind of talked about some of the guys he developed. He talked about Jalen Petrie being the one guy at Baylor that stayed around, when he took over, and how, the condition of that program was not in good shape when he arrived there. And
my God, it was a disaster. That's still in my mind is an absolute miracle when he worked there.
Absolutely. That program could be on levels of SMU.
It was damn near a death penalty.
If that's not Matt Rule and he doesn't do that job with it.
If it's not Matt Rule, it probably is another SMU.
But the one guy who stayed, the one guy who was committed and stayed committed through Rule, Jalen Petrie, saw the field. They work with him, and turns out he was one of the best, the best safety in the NFL, borderline best safety in the NFL last year. He talked about, working up Hassan Reddick, who walked on at Temple, and then the previous coaching staff kind of ran him off the program, and then he brought him back in, worked him out, moved him around, and then turns out to be an incredible, NFL player that Rule had at Carolina, and then in that last year they just said, "Yeah, we can't keep him. Sorry, got to cut him. Can't afford him." And like those are kind of the
that's gotta kill you,
right? Like that's especially somebody that you've got that relationship with and that bond with to work up. But one thing I wanted to throw out there, because I know it's something that you and I talk about, Eric, is I go back to Rule's big introduction on, of course, the elegance of him having his ceremony in the practice field versus the previous coach having him in the suite on the third floor of Memorial Stadium. The symbolism there was not lost upon me. But one of the things he said, and it's become kind of apparent that it's still a running theme throughout spring ball, is the trying to build Nebraska men and trying to build people that the University of Nebraska can be proud of. and people that can be proud to go to Nebraska. And I mean, all of us are native Nebraskans. I come from a little bit different, being a South Central 8-man guy rather than you guys, but I think that that's still something that, regardless of however the fluctuations in the last 25, 30 years of rural flight and the way that, production and everything flies in Nebraska, that's still a very proud source.
Oh, very
for
much. Yeah.
Nebraskans.
I remember talking to Osborne. Osborne said part of the reason he loved the walk-on program so much was because he kind of had sort of this ballpark number in his head where he wanted roughly 60 to 70% of the team to be local guys. And when I say local guys, Nebraska, Iowa, the Dakotas, Kansas, Wyoming, Colorado kids, wanted it guys from just right around here. And he said the reason for that was because he said if you walk into a locker room and you're in Nebraska, or he said if you're in if you're a school in any state, and he said if 60 to 70% of that locker room are guys from that state, or at least from that area, he goes, the local or regional buy-in is huge. He goes, if you've got 60%, 70% of the teams from Nebraska, in terms of the total makeup of that locker room, you can bring in half a dozen guys from Florida. They're going to buy into Nebraska. You're going to bring in a bunch of guys from Texas. They're going to buy into Nebraska. You're going to bring the Peter brothers from New Jersey. They're going to buy into Nebraska. You're going to bring in the Abdul Muhammads from California, and they're going to buy into Nebraska. That's the thing that Osborne loved about it. And if you can get that local buy-in, but you got to have local guys to do it. And I'm not saying you got to have a team with 160 guys on it with just endless numbers of walk-ons. But if you've got a sizable number of kids from that state, it makes a huge difference in terms of the total buy-in to the local ethics, ethos, whatever you want to call it, mindset.
Right, the local mindset.
So yeah, I mean, everybody has that Nebraska mindset. I mean, kind of the other story about that always jumps in my head was right at the end of the Bill Callahan era. There was the Oklahoma State game,
right,
where Oklahoma State put up, was it like 35 in the first quarter? So it was just nuking Nebraska. And that was the game where fans just halftime, they're like, we're out of here. We're gonna let our feet do our talking for us. So there was I'm trying to, God, it might have been Mitch Sherman. I thought it was Mitch or Dirk. God, maybe it was Eric Olson. I'm forgetting who it was here, but
moved around a little bit too.
It was, but I remember it was one of the guys at the time who was with the World Herald. I thought it was one of those World Herald guys at the time, and they were randomly grabbing some of the fans and just like, hey, what are your thoughts watching this play out? And he asked a random fan that question, and the response was outstanding, I thought, because, I mean, when Callahan came in, the recruiting was amazing because he brought in John Blake. Blake, I mean, it's kind of the old line about, I mean, Blake could sell snow to Eskimos. I mean, it was just his ability to recruit was mind-blowing. I knew guys who knew him when he was at Oklahoma and when he was on Switzer's staff with the Dallas Cowboys. When they were gunning for a free agent with the Cowboys, they'd send Coach Blake after him. I mean, the guy could recruit, and you had there was some absolutely amazing talent in Lincoln at that time. When Callahan was down there, the guy had an eye for talent, and he and his staff did an amazing job on getting a lot of that talent to Lincoln. The problem was then both from a developmental standpoint, but also getting that buy-in to the program was almost non-existent.
Right.
And when the reporter asked the fan their thoughts on this, the fan's response was, we've got all of these recruits who are coming here to play at Nebraska, but nobody's here to play for Nebraska. And then he said the fan just kept on walking.
That's actually, you're right. That's actually like a perfect answer to the question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you've got to
You got to have the guys that are playing for
Yeah.
something bigger than themselves, which we've been touching on a lot lately too, which is, I get questions from people about photography all the time. And we were touched on our last podcast about understanding your why. Why are you doing what you're doing? And I'm a big believer in most things that why can't be a selfish why.
Yeah.
If it's overly selfish, you're probably going to fail.
But
if you're doing it for something bigger outside of yourself, I think that's, from a personal standpoint, it's why I always gravitated towards team sports. And I think my son's the same way, gravitates towards team sports over individual sports, because there's not, camaraderie is overly simplified, but you're doing it for something. You're doing it for you're doing it for something greater than yourself, for the team, for your buddy, right? You're accountable when you go to the weight room every day. You're accountable to your buddy. And if your buddy's got to be accountable to you on those, because if you're doing it for selfish reasons on those days that you really just don't want it, and we all have those days, if you're not accountable to something bigger, it's really easy to talk yourself out of it. Yeah, I don't need to run today. Right?
I'm the only one I'm hurting here.
Right.
If you don't have that team
but if you're
mentality.
accountable to, to coach and your teammates and the program and the state, and in terms of Nebraska, I don't know how you sit on your butt in your hotel, or not in your dorm room or your apartment, and not get over to that weight room, because holy crap, there's a lot of people counting on me being able to do my job.
And that was a dynamic that was, at the time I was down in Lincoln, was incredibly strong. I mean, and I say that, at least I know it was for the offensive line and the defensive line, because those were the guys that we always hung out with together. And I remember there was a period of time where we were doing extra weightlifting workouts. Hopefully Boyd Epley's not listening to this. He'll be pissed now we did this, but we would kind of do our weightlifting workout at the stadium, and then the entire offensive line, and we'd go eat dinner. Everybody would go home, study for a couple hours, and then like 8 o'clock at night, the offensive line would go to the University Rec Center, and we would do our real workout. And the defensive line, they always went to, it was the North Lincoln Gold's gym, up there by the kind of halfway between Nebraska Wesleyan and Lincoln Northeast. What was it, up off Layton, I think, and Lincoln. But the D-line, the whole D-line, Perella and Kevin Raymakers and those guys grabbed everybody, and they'd head up to the Gold's gym. And then all of us on the offensive line would go meet at the University Rec Center. We had a little separation, because honestly, we would have run out of weights. We had too many guys in there at once.
I would be surprised.
We did it together, but
I'd be surprised if if one of those things like we were talking about earlier, where he didn't know, but he just maybe turned a blind eye to it just a little bit. Come on. Over the course of 4 years, I would think, they would
probably
he would have found out somehow.
Well, and honestly, he did, and he hated the idea of it. I think any coach does hate that. Whether it's, I don't care if you're a tennis coach, a basketball coach, a swim coach. If all of a sudden you find out your guys are like leaving your domain to go someplace else to not do your program.
Right.
And what ended up happening is we ended up, I remember a group of us we were butting heads with Boyd, and Boyd finally was like, all right, what is the program you guys want to do? And we told him, okay, here it is. We want to do this, 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 and this. And here's how we're going to implement it. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's our measuring stick, so on and so forth. So we laid it all out for him. We had reasons why we wanted to do it that way. We had some of the science behind it, all of that. This is what you get when you get a couple of biology majors involved with this stuff.
I would think it would be the best way to get through to Boyd too.
Well, and he was like, all right, let's do it. You guys, and he even selected, he was like, all right, you guys on the O-line, you guys on the D-line, I'm going to let you do it because he goes, I have a hard time arguing with the fact because he goes, I'm looking at like myself and Sty and John Perrell and these guys who are just freaks of natures in the weight room. And he was like, all right, I can't argue with the results that you guys have already had. You guys can do it. And so, and the only goofy thing with the program is that it didn't sync with the days of the week because we would do this routine where we'd lift for 3 days, take 1 day off, lift for 3 days, take 2 days off, hit repeat. Well, that's a 9-day cycle.
Right.
Well, there's 7 days
trying to have
it
on a 7-day cycle.
And he's trying to keep everything on a 5-day cycle on Monday through Friday. And so he or one of his assistants would meet us if one of our days lifting fell on a Saturday or Sunday. They would meet us at 6 a.m. at the stadium weight room and unlock it for us to go in and work out. And we'd go into our workout, and by 8 o'clock we were back out of there again. There you go. But he actually let us do our own program for basically about our sophomore year onward. So, but it was one of those. But it's that dedication where you're sitting there and going like, hey, you've got a group of guys that are literally saying to the coach, hey, we can work harder and we can work better and we can improve more. And we want to do that. Give us the opportunity to do that. And I will say the coaching staff at the time was like, and here's some people thinking outside the box, willing to do more than what we're giving them.
Right.
People like that, you got to let them go do what
I was going to say,
do,
anybody that wants to do more, you got to kind of let it, as long as they're doing it correctly, right? And they're not hurting themselves. You kind of got to let them go.
Yeah.
There's a lot of similarities there, though. I think of just the people I've talked to, since the new rule staff and everything came over, the cycle and everything. The Corey Campbell strength and conditioning staff, they do the 3-day regeneration day and then another 3 or 4 days depending on your lifting program, and then a regeneration day, where those regen days are a lot less strenuous with actual lifting. But they're more focused on mobility and stretching to relieve muscle tension and everything like that. I'll defer a lot of the medical advice to you.
Well, and that's one of those things. I mean, truth be told, I wasn't down there. I got a day job, so I wasn't down there much to see workouts or practices, etc. Over, truth be told, ever. And so I don't have a good feel for it. And so it's always interesting to me to see how it works out. I mean, and I think people worked hard and did some solid things when Pelini was down there. With Mike Riley, I heard there was dust in the weight room on half the weights. I mean, the guys just didn't work out that much was kind of the word that got communicated to me. When Zach came in with Scott, that was kind of an interesting thing to me because Zach was actually one of the assistant strength coaches after I was down there. And he had a really good track record. I don't think you saw some of the development of the players. I mean, it was kind of one of these things when I looked at Zach and I looked at his staff and I looked at what appeared to be going on in the weight room. It seemed like they were doing all the right things there, but you didn't see it translate onto the field. I'd like to think when I was down there, late 80s, early throughout the 1990s into the very early 2000s, you saw this translation onto the field through the strength program. And I didn't see that in the time when Scott was down there. Now, that may not be a strength and conditioning thing. That might have just been, maybe it's a motivation thing, maybe it's a recruiting thing, maybe it's how the coaches are implementing
Well,
their actual.
you guys back in the 90s were way ahead on the on the mobility and functional strength
And
side
yeah,
of things. I've heard countless stories about the drills and things you guys would do as offensive linemen that nobody else was doing to work on hip mobility, like
yeah.
all the things that are commonplace now, right? I mean, when
Well,
Wyatt's out with Steve, I mean, everything is centered around mobility and functional strength.
well, and I look at that whole science in general now, and it's mind blowing to me, because I sit around and think about the fact that when I was in high school, it drove me nuts that I was one of maybe 5 guys in the entire high school that worked out and trained consistently year round. And now you had guys, I mean, you had a lot of guys. I mean, myself too. I played more than one sport in high school. But I mean, you had guys who just really didn't lift weights. That was it. Just nobody did. It was, well, and man, it makes me sore and it takes time and
I can't even fathom that.
standard high school excuses. But I mean, when I was in high school, I was one of like 5 guys in the whole football team that lifted weights consistently. Now, you look at those 5 guys, they all went and played college sports somewhere. I mean, there's a couple of basketball players, 2 or 3 football players. And so that's one of those dynamics that was interesting to me at the time. And then you fast forward to now where, I mean, everybody's doing it. And I not everybody, but I mean, I would probably
I
say
think probably
70,
most, yeah.
probably 75, 85% of most high school sports teams are doing fairly consistently doing some kind of training program. And then you've seen the rise of stuff with, I mean, all the stuff that you see here in town with Steve, with Warren Academy, and everything that he's done. And there's a number of other groups in town that have started these training centers. They work. I mean, when it comes to, if you've got a parent who has a kid, and I always say it's like, you can't do the living vicariously through your kid, but if your kid wants to get better, I'm not saying be a great athlete, but if they want to get better, man, there are some amazing opportunities now that we didn't have.
Oh, geez, we didn't have any of that
Yeah,
stuff.
at the time. I mean, I'm sitting around, and at the same time, too, part of me is sitting around here and thinking, would I have been as good as I was then? Because
Relative to
yeah,
everybody else, because the overall bar would have been raised.
yeah, I mentioned when I graduated high school, I was 6'4", 6'5". I was about 295. And I did not have body fat. I mean, I looked like a pro wrestler. I don't look like that now. Baggy shirts are our friends.
Yes.
Dad bod. But I mean, at the time, I mean, I was 295 with a washboard.
Right.
Because I lived in the weight room. I lived on the track. I was running stadium stairs. I had this whole jump rope routine. Jump roped all the time. Footwork, balance, quickness.
Mm-hmm.
We'd go out, play racquetball all the time. I mean, it was just all this stuff. And I'm sitting here going like, everybody does this now.
You're right.
I look at the kids posting these weightlifting videos and I'm like, damn, these are high school kids. That's what I was squatting as a sophomore in college. And I was a freak in college.
I've told you a little bit about my own son, where he's at as a freshman was like, that's where I was at as a junior.
Yeah.
And he was doing it going into his freshman. I'm like, geez.
Yeah.
But it's not just, it's not just that they're getting in the weight room. I mean, we talk about Steve because that's what I have the most experience with. Like early on when my kid was out there, they weren't just like piling weight on the bar and doing back squats. I mean, Wyatt was there for like a year before they even did a back squat, but they were all on proper form. and everything was centered around mobility and functional strength.
Yeah. And that's,
Right.
and I will say that has been the functional strength
because
thing.
I don't know when I was in high school and nobody talking about functional
No,
strength.
it
It
was
was squat, bench,
squat.
deadlift. Maybe
If you wanted to get a little crazy, dumbbell bench press.
dumbbell,
That was getting nuts.
we did. I remember doing incline dumbbell bench presses, and those of us that ran the ball, we did leg extensions and curls, and then we had this
Yeah.
other machine that would mimic the running motion to work on your glutes and your hamstrings. But
That was
other than that, that was pretty much
Yeah,
it.
it was pretty basic.
That was pretty
stuff.
basic stuff, and you did, you know.
Which, and I will say, when I hit the door down in Lincoln, there was a shift there, and I was like one of those. I want to do more squats and bench press. Like, no, we're gonna do the cleans, the snatches, the clean and jerks. We're gonna do the multi-motion Olympic lifts.
That was about the time that the jammers started.
And the jammers. So the jammers hit the door when I was down there, and when I was in school there, sometime between, I'll say between 90 and 94, the jammers hit the door. And it was all about hip rotation, hip explosion, sort of that the ground based translating explosion from the ground on up.
Right.
That hit the door down there at that time. And it was interesting too, looking at the sort of the cooperation between different schools, because I know UNL, the strength coaches there, one of the programs that was, again, kind of on a lot of the cutting edge research was Penn State at the time. And so Boyd and his staff, and I got to be honest, I don't know who the Penn State strength coach was at the time, but I mean, those guys were on the phone constantly. And then, I mean, research was going back and forth. And I remember Penn State would come up with something, we'd give it a try. Boyd would come up with something, they'd give it a try. I mean, there was a lot of that going on at the time, where you were coming up with a lot of that, the functional strength mindset. And that was something before it was, well, we're going to try and squat small livestock, and we're going to try and bench press small automobiles. And if you can do that, you're good to go. That was all you worried about. So it was an interesting dynamic when you saw that shift, because for some of us who are like the old school powerlifting guys, we're going to get a huge bench, a huge squat, and
huge deadlift.
Yep.
That was the three.
We're going to drink protein shakes until we vomit.
Or take big horse pills of amino acids and things like that.
Oh man,
I tell my kids
the
about
Joe
that.
Eater supplements.
Yep. I was in the Joe Eater, and just like amino acid, like, you know, I still remember those big, huge pills I would swallow every day.
They were always kind of yellow. They made you belch yellow. I mean, your breath was yellow. I don't know. So here's how big a nerd I was for this stuff. So my dad worked for UNL. He was director of housing down there for, from 77 to I think 34 years. And taught a few classes in his time down there. Anyway, so he had some great connections. So he had a buddy who was in the food science department. So a couple of nutritionists that he knew. So I had him picking the brains of some of the nutritionists about, hey, I want to make the perfect protein shake. How do I go about doing this? And I remember they were talking about, listen, you need these raw, unprocessed proteins. Yep. And probably your two best sources are actually just plain Jane skim milk and egg whites. And I remember it was these Rocky Balboa ones. And then he was like, he goes, if you're buying a protein shake mix, he goes, you're wasting your money because it's so heavily processed. You're not absorbing half of it. And so I remember he was basically like, use skim milk, use egg whites, flavor it with something. And what I ended up finding was actually, remember Ovaltine?
Oh, yes.
They still make it. Little Ralphie, he's drinking his Ovaltine, going to get his decoder ring. I bought sugar-free Ovaltine, I think Super Saver or IGA carried it in Lincoln. So I'd get sugar-free chocolate Ovaltine, tasted just like Nestle Quick.
Oh,
And it actually had
good to
about,
know.
and each dose had about every 2 scoops had the equivalent, about a multivitamin's worth of, multivitamin in it. So, but it was no protein. All that came from the milk, and I'd do like 4 egg whites and fill
Right.
the blender with skim milk and do about 2 of those a day, in addition to everything I was eating. But
Wonderful.
so it tasted pretty good. I'm probably lucky I never caught salmonella from it, but
True.
most of the eggs are partially pasteurized anyway, so I think I was pretty safe.
Yeah, you're
but
probably all right.
That's not my expertise. I was a meat judging on the meat judging team in Lawrence Nelson FFA. Shout out.
Nice.
So
Nice. Oh, I ate plenty of that too. So.
Yeah, there was a fair amount of that.
You can only, I was going to say, my mom was trying to feed 3 boys and all of us were big, all of us ate everything.
Oh man, I was listening a couple years ago. We did. I think it was Aaron that did a story on the Farniok boys.
yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
What it was
yeah.
like to, and I remember ask her, how did you feed these 2 boys in because they were like a year apart or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
Well,
so,
there was like 4.
but yeah, like
Because you had the
like,
Iowa State Farniok, then you had the Oklahoma
Right.
Farniok, and then you had the Nebraska
and then she would talk about her trips to Costco, right? And it was like, gallons of milk and and the cheap, the amount of protein, and here I am complaining about the one kid still at home, the offensive defensive lineman who just like eats, and I'm like, God, buying protein in bulk at Costco, and big up vacuum seal packs of chicken that we go through in like 3 days, kind of thing. And I can't imagine feeding those.
Yeah, my mom bought, I think there was a Goodrich in Lincoln, and she would buy directly from Goodrich for milk. Eggs, there was a friend of a friend of a friend deal, had a farmer who would sell her eggs directly. And so we'd get eggs by the pallet.
But like how much room in the fridge did the eggs take up, and how much
You needed 2 deep freezes.
Well, the pallet was, the pallet of eggs, I remember the farmer would drop it off, and the way she did it was about the square as this table here. I mean, it was an actual pallet of eggs. And my mom, because she would get them direct from this farmer, I mean, it was pennies. So she would then sell like whatever the pallet cost, she would sell that many of the worth of it to the neighbors, and then keep half a pallet for us. So we were actually only going through like half a pallet a week.
Only half a pallet.
So, but we would do that, and then well, that was a lot of pork chops over the years.
I bet.
And I can't remember who I was talking with, but we go back for like Easter or holiday or something back to South Central Nebraska, and you just get to talking with people from from Lawrence Nelson or from Blue Hill, Shickley every once in a while, and we're all small town people. We're all, some of us actually grew up on the farm. Some of us grew up around it. And, everybody wants to talk about Husker football and like the farm bred, like the go out and get those farm raised kids. And I don't want to say that they're not there entirely, but it is an entirely different animal now than Devaney getting in his car and driving, 40 minutes outside of Lincoln, because just like the innovations of modern farming and raising is just not what it was 40 some years ago.
It also touches on that, what we were talking about with the kids nowadays getting better training younger. Like you used to go get the farm boys because not only were they the right size that you wanted and they were strong, but they had functional strength. Like, you go throw hay bales around for an afternoon. That's functional strength with leverage, and right. So they came to the football field understanding innately functional strength.
Yeah.
Right. And nowadays, like you said, the changes in farming technique and mechanization, combined with, the city boys getting better functional strength training at earlier ages, I think that's kind of
It-
evened out a little bit.
Yeah, it is. But I mean,
but I think those farm boys probably also bring a work ethic
yeah.
that
Sure.
could really serve the LA kids well.
But I mean, at the same time, too, I mean, and some of it goes back to what we were talking about. You want that local
Yep.
Yeah.
mentality where you're playing for Nebraska. So you've got to have the guys who do that, and that you've got to go statewide to get that. You're seeing the other thing that's been really, really interesting for me has been seen over time the development of, I mean, it started in Omaha where you had, or Lincoln maybe, where you had like the Warren Academy or Explosive Edge, but you're seeing people who have kind of bought in, and that's going statewide now, especially with say like 7-on-7, for instance.
Yeah.
And so you're seeing a lot of these guys from smaller towns, they're doing 7-on-7 leagues now. They're doing travel leagues. Now they got a hell of a lot more driving to do than the guys here in Omaha, but you're seeing more of that. You're seeing more of the training, and it's across multiple sports too. I mean, one of the things that kind of surprised me was so I 2 of our 3 kids are wrestlers. And those 2 were and are very good wrestlers, did some club wrestling. And you look around Omaha and Lincoln, and man, there are some very well developed club wrestling programs.
Yep.
But then it's one of those things. Then you go to the big Nebraska AAU wrestling meets, the USA wrestling meets. And here comes O'Neill with Leprechaun Wrestling Club. I mean, here comes Lexington with Minuteman Wrestlers. I mean, it's one of these like, dude, everybody's got
Everybody's
got it. Yeah, it's
the high school farm program.
Yeah, you've got to do it. You've got to do it in all sports if you're going to have any success at all. And so that was something that I thought has been cool for me to see, is the development of within the club sports. And I'm not saying you got to play the same sport year round. And most of these kids are playing, they're playing everything, but everybody's got a favorite sport that they do at least a little bit year round. If football is your thing, and you're in Garing, you're getting together with the guys from Scotts Bluff and you're doing 7-on-7. I mean, if you're up by Wayne, Pierce, Norfolk, Stanton, those folks are all getting together and doing 7-on-7. I mean, you're going to figure out a way to make it work. So you're seeing more of that development. That again, it's interesting to me, that dynamic, because you didn't see that when we were growing up.
No, when we were growing up, the only place you saw that was in baseball.
Yeah.
Right. With the travel teams, and with, here in Omaha, there were like, when we were growing up in Omaha, there were like 3 travel teams, and now there's a billion.
Yeah. Right. Well, and I mean, when I was a kid, I mean, the idea, my son played it was Westgate, Westside Athletic Association baseball. Very good. I call it's kind of a nice middle of the road competitive level, kind of comparable to like UBAB teams, or it's where
my second boy played. So.
It's Little League.
Yep.
It's Little League. So we'd always play, you'd go play Carter Lake Little League. We'd go down, play Ralston Little League. We'd go play Papio Little League. But the thing that was interesting to me there is we'd go up and you'd go play Blair Little League, Bennington. You'd go over into Iowa, hit a lot of go down, play Glenwood Little League. I mean, the idea of doing that when I was a kid, it was one of those like, well, I mean,
we're not playing
like
on our field.
We might go hit Waverly, but that, I mean, man, that's a whole nother town. The concept of that as a kid doing that now, but yeah, now it's one of those things. Even in Omaha, the teams are hitting the road. You're looking for competition at all different levels.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, and to put a bow on it, like I go back to Carter Nelson, the kid from Ainsworth, who I remember talking with him and his head coach back in October before Penn State Notre Dame and his, recruitment really started to take off. And I was like, hey, I'm an 8-man guy. Your defensive coordinator went to my high school. Like, I get it. And I kind of asked him, like, were y'all all worried about that? Being an 8-man football player at standout. He's like, he thought about it, but then they went to a couple camps in the summer where, he became MVP of one camp, word got around. And then next thing you know, Nick Saban's watching 8-man Nebraska tape because you've got a kid who's incredibly athletic and can move around on an 8-man field. So he knows conditioning, knows how to move around, explosive, can dunk, and he high jumps 7 foot in track. Like,
that kid's a freak, by the way.
Yeah.
And I say that as a compliment.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's the most compliment. Freak
you tell any athlete they're a freak. That's high praise right there.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap that up here. So
Yeah.
I personally could keep talking forever. So, but
he can.
So,
I never shut up. You ask anybody in my family that.
So we'll go ahead and wrap up this edition of the Eye Test with Brady, and thanks for Rob for coming in. Hit that subscribe button, notifications, and we'll see you around next time.
Yeah.
A Hurrdat Sports Network production.